And I want to talk about, or at least go through the way that technology is being used now to address social isolation, because there is a crossover you're going to see between social isolation technology and technology that can monitor people. So we have linking people together online support groups. We move to a new office next week, and I'm really excited. We have, for the first time, the ability to teleconference, and we'll be able to do online support groups, blogs and blogging, Facebook, instant messaging, email, Twitter, all these different ways now that we can bring people together and have them interacting and address social isolation. Okay, now I want to get into the sort of the meat of this. So privacy and advance directives. The healthcare power of attorney and living will, and so the power of attorney and the living will, if you do these in advance, you can address an awful lot of these conditions up front. So for me, I use myself as an example all the time. I have this device on my phone. I have a security camera hooked up in my living room, and I can turn this on, and I'll click Caesar, and it will open up, and in a second I will be, right now I can now look at my dog and see how she's doing, and basically that's what it is. I want to be able to monitor my dog. She's sleeping on the couch, so there isn't a problem. So this is a security device right now, right? She isn't chewing anything up, she's not destroying anything. But as soon as I push this button, it will bring up a microphone. Hi Ava, hope you're doing well, I'll see you in a few hours. And now I just talked to my dog, and it's gone from a security device to a social isolation device. Now, what is it? I mean, what is the primary function? The primary function is security, but it's fulfilling a secondary role. And I think you have to look at it. What is the primary function of the device? Is this really a social interaction device? It is for me and for my dog, but primarily it's a secure. The way I look at it is, if they can see me and I can see them, then it's social interaction. But if it's one way, I view that as more security. But the healthcare power of attorney can address all this. I've told my family, you can put monitors all over my house, you can alarm the doors, anything you want to do. I don't care about my privacy. I want to stay home with my dogs as long as I can. And if you put me in a nursing home, I'm going to try to get kicked out, and I've been in this business long enough to know how to do it, so you're not going to do very well if you try to force me in a nursing home.
You need to give me some tips on that.
When you do privacy and advance directives, as had been mentioned earlier, the patient can be involved in the planning and decision making, and that is really, really important. At any stage, that's important. But if they're doing this before they have dementia, if you go down to the bottom, providing medical informed consent requires capacity to comprehend information. So if they've done their advance directives, they can avoid all of these problems. And what ends up happening is, if you don't have those advance directives, the family's left trying to figure out either what you wanted or what's in your best interest.
Yep. It's very important. I just want to add this. Oh, shoot. Do I have to just wait for it to go on? Okay. Can I just add that it's really important to have it in writing? I mean, it's good to tell your family what you want, but when push comes to shove and they're faced with an emergency situation and they're panicked, and it's good to have it in writing,
yes.
Bottom line. So
yes.
Just wanted to add that.
And DHS has these on their website. They have a great link to this, so there is a way to access that. And then types of wandering. Basically, we have two different types of wandering, right? You're going to either wander away on foot or you're going to wander away in a vehicle. And there's a big difference between the two in terms of how society is going to look at that. If you're on foot, say, and it's 75 degrees out, you walk out of your assisted living facility. We have some time, right? We've got a window that we can get you and bring you back. What if it's 5 below zero? Now suddenly everything has changed. And what if they get in a car and they go? Now if they get in a car, it's not just their safety and welfare that we're concerned about, it's the public safety and welfare as well. So at that point, privacy is going out the window, because health and safety is going to trump privacy. So that's why you'll see a silver alert will go out. HIPAA doesn't matter. We're trying to protect the public health, safety, and welfare. Warning signs for people wandering. If people are coming home and they're coming home late and they can't explain why they're late, A lot of times they got lost and they don't want to tell you. Having difficulty navigating new environments. Having trouble finding familiar places. I talked about my grandpa earlier and how he was having difficulty driving. Well, the police got involved and said, you have to come in and be retested. And he went out, and he had lived in Madison for probably 50 years at that point. He had come from Monroe, Wisconsin, and always gone to the same motor vehicle department building and renewed his license. He went out to renew it, and he couldn't find it. And he came back, and he had been having some small strokes. But he was cognizant enough to know that he couldn't find the place. He said, I'm not going to drive anymore. And he recognized that because he couldn't find a familiar location, that he wasn't going to drive anymore. So if you're lucky, it will happen with someone who is aware enough to make the decision themselves. Unfortunately, a lot of times that's not the case. So wandering prevention and technology. We have security cameras, but then where are they going to be located? Do you want a security camera in the bathroom? You know, where are these security cameras going to be? Who's going to have access to them? My security camera has a password, only I have access to it. Alarm systems, who's going to monitor the alarm systems? Text alerts, who's going to be receiving those text alerts? Mobile phone apps, if you're using a mobile phone app to track mom's phone, who has the ability to track mom's phone? And how is that going to be used? Talk with the person with dementia. Find out who they're comfortable having as the person that does these things, and see what they're comfortable with. What are they willing to have in terms of what's going to be monitoring them? And part of the difficulty, one of the things that we haven't talked about yet, is at what point in the disease process is this person? You know, is this someone like me who is 50 years old, and maybe if I had just been diagnosed with young onset or early onset dementia, I'm still, competent, I'm still, with it? Or is this someone who is towards the late stage of the disease or middle stage of the disease, and they're not really with it at all? I mean, there's a spectrum of dementia that has to play into all of this, and that's what makes a lot of this really difficult. You are in a big spectrum. You're in a spectrum from basically where we are to the point where people are not feeding themselves anymore. That's the spectrum of Alzheimer's. And so we say prevention methods first. Identify the most likely time they're going to wander. Keep things like car keys out of sight. Use devices to let you know if egress is happening. There's no downside to alarms. I mean, alarms are your friend. And there's no substitute for supervision. Technology is not your babysitter. You still need to have a human element involved. And then we say before someone wanders, make a plan. Keep a current photo that can be transmitted electronically, a recent photo of the car they drive if they're still driving, and then make note of and take photos of identifying marks, bumper stickers, dents, vanity plates, anything that will help identify that vehicle. And I've mentioned before, at what stage is the person with dementia? I mean, that's a really important and key piece. And then tracking devices. We get into this now. GPS versus radio-based. So there's the GPS, the eye in the sky working off satellites, and then there's radio-based, which is some of these wearable, you wear a device on your bracelet, and then there's usually 3 different antennas available. 1 can be mounted on an airplane, 2 on the ground. They can triangulate your position. If you had someone that was, say they lived at home next to a big forest and they wandered on foot, I would want radio telemetry because it's very good at that. GPS would be if you think the person's going to go in a vehicle, if you think they're going to go long distances. What we find is that the GPS is not very good in really built up areas. Like if they're in a dense city with skyscrapers, if they're in a building, GPS is not as likely to find them there, or in forested areas where you have heavy canopy and they're going to be below that canopy. GPS is not good at finding them there. When we first trialed this in La Crosse, we had a Vietnam veteran go out into the woods and hide, and the sheriff's department went out with the radio telemetry to find him. And we found him, but he had buried himself. I mean, you could stand right there and look at him, you'd have no idea the guy was there. He was an expert in camouflage. He covered himself in leaves and twigs and everything. So unless you had dug up, you would have had no idea he was there, but you couldn't hide from that radio telemetry. So that's how good that can be at pinpointing in a smaller area. But radio telemetry doesn't have the range that GPS has. So if I were worried that my mom was wandering, I would talk to her about, hey mom, I'd really like you to have both of these. My mom doesn't have dementia, and she would want me to tell you that. But if she did have dementia, that would be what I'd be looking at, both of those areas of technology. And best practices, just from the powers that be that study these things, the best practice is to make the decision at the time of diagnosis with the person with dementia, the family, and the caregiver. And what do people think? What do people think about tracking devices? Well, studies show cognitively intact older adults favor the idea of tracking people with dementia. So before they get dementia, at least they favor that idea. So it gives you, a good baseline, and it makes you feel a little bit better about using some of this stuff. They also say they want structured meetings with family caregivers are preferred for decision making. They want to be part of the decision making if they get to the point where they need to have a tracking device. Caregivers give preference to safety over autonomy when the caregiver is responsible for the patient. What do you think is going to happen when they're not responsible for the patient? When the caregivers are not responsible for the patient, they give autonomy to safety when the patient is under the care of others. And the same holds true with families. If you're caring for the person, safety is your priority. That's what your focus tends to be. My task is, we're very task-oriented as human beings. My task is to keep this person safe, and that's what you tend to focus on. So guiding principles. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights enshrines both privacy and freedom of movement as fundamental rights. So I think that's one of the things to consider when you're using these things. Remember that we have freedom of movement and we have privacy. So we have to balance those two rights, and that should be at the center of decision making. And remember, cognitively impaired people need their rights protected along with their safety. A lot of the times I think we focus so much on safety and we forget sometimes, or we don't forget, but I think the right side gets maybe short shift. And sometimes it's out of necessity, but something to keep in mind. Now, questions to consider. Do the safety benefits of the technology outweigh the risks to personal liberty? And what was mentioned earlier, what is the intention of the technology? What is the idea behind it? And does a tracking device, does it enhance or restrict autonomy? And going back to the car and putting that device in the car, is the idea behind it that we want to take mom's keys from her? That's the decision we've already made without any evidence, without knowing how she's doing. Or is it that we want to assess this, we're going to put this in and try to figure out how to give mom as much autonomy as possible? And obviously I would suggest that you should be looking at it from the perspective of how we give mom the most autonomy while balancing her safety. And then our interests coming up against each other. And there are all sorts of interests that you can probably think of yourself, but one I pulled out was patient privacy versus caregiver convenience. I think you'll see in one of the upcoming slides, or maybe it was one of the past slides, I mentioned that wandering is very stressful for the caregiver. I mean, that's the reality of it. When the person wanders, they're at risk, but the caregiver is also going through a lot of stress too. And our caregivers sometimes doing things that's not so much in the interest of the person with dementia, but it's more in their interests. And sometimes I know that does happen. I had a guy in a support group say that his wife was on a sleeping pill, and the doctor said, I'm going to tell you, I'm not giving the sleeping pill to her because she needs it. I'm giving it to her for you. And the deal was she was up all night. He wasn't getting any sleep. And he said, I can't be up all night and then taking care of her all day. So, and in that's a legitimate case of that. I'm not saying that these are never legitimate cases. I'm just saying that these are things that we need to consider. So using technology to find a person with dementia. A whole lot we can do today to find someone when they're lost with dementia that we weren't able to do before, and an awful lot of this people don't know about. So please get the word out. We have this great Silver Alert program. We have all these ways to get things out, but people don't know that tracking a cell phone requires a court order unless you have someone else's name on it. So if I was worried about mom wandering again, I would get my name on mom's cell phone account so that if mom wandered, I could immediately tell the Department of Justice, hey, you're authorized to track that phone right now. Don't get a court order. Don't worry about that. You can track it right now. And you can track cell phones yourself now with those applications that as we had mentioned before. Same thing with banks and credit cards. You can have someone put on a bank or credit card account not authorized to withdraw any money, but they're able to monitor the account. That can be beneficial for a whole lot of reasons. I had a grandmother who gave away $20,000 in 1 year to people calling up saying, you've won something, just send a few $100s for the shipping, and she would do it again and again. She wasn't remembering that she had just done this. It was over $20,000 in 1 year. Then we got on her bank account, told the bank no checks were to be authorized that didn't have a second person signing that were over $25, and that ended it. But if the person is wandering in a car, where are they going to stop? What do you run out of? What did I stop on the way down here for? I had to stop for gas. You're going to stop for gas. And once they stop for gas and use the bank card, you now have a direction of travel. You know where they're, and you can frequently, a family will be able to tell where mom or dad is going from where they have used that bank card. Oh, they're on their way to Indiana, because they used to live there. And that Safe Return program, we've recovered people as far away. The farthest that I found so far was South Dakota, but the guy was recovered safely. And tracking a vehicle. I mean, nowadays, most vehicles have GPS embedded in them. BMW has BMW Direct. GM has, and I took this right off the GM website, so just to be full disclosure there. GM Family Link, it's an add-on service that allows OnStar members to stay connected to their loved ones who are traveling without you. Using the OnStar Family Link website, you can locate an enrolled vehicle at any time. You can also choose to receive vehicle location alerts at any time in the form of email or text message. You select the day, time, and frequency of alerts. There are other things you can do with this. If you think the car shouldn't be leaving at night, you can get an alert. If the car shouldn't, if you want an alert, if the car moves between 9 p.m. and 9 a.m., you'll get an alert that the car moved. If the car has gone more than a certain distance away from the home, one of the things DOT does really well is restricting driver's license rather than pulling them when people get dementia. And they may say you can only drive during daylight hours, or you can only drive within so many miles of home. Well, this would tell you someone's gotten on the interstate and they haven't figured out how to get off, and you'd get that alert. Really neat things you can do with that you couldn't do in the past. So this is, and I'm not trying to sales pitch this at all. I've never used OnStar, but everyone seems to have a different version of this is the message I'm trying to get out. So Family Link, it's $3.99 a month in addition to an existing OnStar membership. I don't know what an existing OnStar membership costs. I don't have a GM product, but in my car I got 4 years of concierge and internet and GPS. So that came with the vehicle. I think a lot of vehicles, when you buy a new vehicle, you get so many years of that service. So for that, in that case, you would only pay $3.99 a month for the extra. And then Silver Alert. I would be remiss if I didn't say a little bit about Silver Alert. The Silver Alert program, it can be issued for anyone over 60 if they're believed to have Alzheimer's, dementia, or another permanent cognitive impairment that poses a threat to the individual's health and safety. And health and safety again. Silver Alert has a recovery rate in the high 90 percentiles. I don't know what it is. It was like 98, I think, the last time that I looked. Incredibly successful program. And the idea was behind Silver Alert was before we had this, if someone was missing, we'd put something out in the Crime Alert Network. And police were looking for them, but you and I weren't. And the idea behind this program was to get lots and lots of eyes looking for them, so that if someone's on the interstate and you see that alert come out, that you would maybe call in. And one of the neat ways that we've recovered people, this was after we had passed the bill, we discovered that in Florida they had added lottery outlets to the Silver Alert program. And at the bill signing with Governor Walker, I said, Florida's added Silver Alerts. it'd be really, or to, to the lottery outlets. So when, and where are lottery outlets? All of those gas stations. And the way it happens is the person's face comes up on the screen, so the tellers see that. And he said, consider it done, added it that quickly, added it to the program. We've covered several people now who have stopped at a gas station, walked in, and the clerk, I just saw him on the thing, and then called police and was able to recover them. And that's really important. I mean, this all started with the babes who went missing. They were gone for 36 hours. And Mr. Babe, 90-something years old, he was a machine gunner at the Battle of the Bulge, served the country, and then he dies of dehydration after having been gone. It was dehydration and exposure. And it was, after 3 days of enduring that, then a couple days later he passed away. So avoiding that is really important to me personally, and I think probably to everyone else in this room. Silver Alert is probably the most successful program that I've ever worked with. I can't think of another program that has such a high rate. So to issue a Silver Alert, these are the criteria that have to be met. There has to be a reasonable belief that the missing person's disappearance is due to the individual's impaired cognitive condition. So if we think the guy was murdered, we're not putting a Silver Alert out, basically. That's what you're getting at. It has to be connected. The Silver Alert request has to be made within 72 hours of the missing person. The idea is we're trying to catch them while they're moving, not when they've already gone someplace and we're not going to find, or your eyes aren't going to spot them. And then there's sufficient information available to disseminate to the public that could assist in locating the missing person. That's why I said before how important it is to have that picture, a recent picture of the individual, and pictures of the vehicle. If you don't have actual pictures of the vehicle, what they will send out with the alert is a generic, it may be a black Chevy Tahoe and it's a red version of this. It's much better if you have the actual vehicle. And it triggers something in your mind when you've seen something and then you see it on the road. It's a much clearer picture for you. And the information has to be able to help you, right? I mean, if you don't have any photos, you don't have any information, John Smith is missing and we think he's driving up the interstate, doesn't do any of us a lot of good, does it? We need the identifying markers to be able to identify John Smith. And how do you access Silver Alert? Silver Alert is accessed through your local law enforcement agency. That is by design. We didn't want people, we saw in other people, sometimes people would police department shop. If their local police department would say, no, we're not issuing a Silver Alert, then they'd go to the county, or if the county said no, they'd go to the local, and if it's a family that has a really big family, sometimes they would have the police department to say, look, we're just going to do it. We don't want all of them mad at us. So that's why your local police department is the one that has to submit the request to the Department of Justice. And then the Department of Justice is the final gatekeeper. They decide yes or no. We think not only does this meet the criteria, but it's legitimate and that we're going to have some potential benefit from doing that. And with that, this is us. We're the Alzheimer's and Dementia Alliance of Wisconsin. And we provide services and programs primarily in South Central Wisconsin. We do public policy for the whole state. That's what I do. And we'll probably have some changes coming now. Our executive director and I started 20 years ago together. I started 2 months before he did, and he just retired. So I'm the last long-timer with the Alliance. But if you have any information you need, anything, contact the main office. And if you're not getting what you need, contact me. I'm Rob Gundermann, and I'll make sure you get whatever it is that you're looking for. If you have any questions, we still have a few minutes. I was told to leave 10 minutes for questions. Looks like we have 5.
You talked about you mentioned online or on telephone support groups. Would that be something statewide that if we would tell a family member about and then they call in? Could you tell us a little bit about that?
That is the idea. We want to be able to do support groups in a much broader sense. There are people who can't get into a support group meeting, and it's just, if you're living in rural Wisconsin, that's really hard for you. If you're caregiving for a spouse, you may not be able to leave your spouse. So that is our goal. We want to be able to put this out statewide. We want to be able to bring in people from all over. we're moving into our new office in a week. So we are at the very infancy of this. I had the TV installed and hooked up 2 days ago. So that's where we're at this point. We now have the technical capability to do these support groups, and we'll see where we can take it from here. Any other questions? All right.
Rob, I do have a question for you. So I'm going to challenge you a little bit. You talked a little bit about technology and people wandering and monitoring. To what extent, we talk about people having liberties and the right to explore their environment and have a good quality of life. To what extent do we tolerate them exploring their environment and allow them to take walks and hike and explore the woods like they did back in Vietnam, or go fishing, or just, pace in their house?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. And how is it addressed now? I mean, it's the spectrum, right? It depends on who the family is and what the family is determined that they think mom or dad would have wanted, or what's in their best interests. And that's why I say it's so important to get those advance directives so that you're making that decision as to how much freedom you want to be able to do these things, because it's a tough call, and it depends on so many factors. How stable is mom? How good is mom at walking? Does mom have a history of falling? How frail is mom? There's so many things that go into the decision making. But it goes back to the balance. You're balancing safety and liberty and autonomy. And as long as you're recognizing that they have the right to that liberty and that autonomy, and that they have a right to take risks if they want to take those risks, then you just have to balance out how much you need to protect the safety end. I tend to be more physically a risk taker. That I grew up with a mom who said, "You will heal, that will not." So she when things broke, she wasn't concerned about me. She was concerned about the thing that broke. She had several kids, and I was the last one. So by the time I came along, everything heals up. So I've just grown up that way. I would much rather err on the side of maybe I break a hip, maybe I break a leg, maybe something happens. I also have a pretty high pain threshold, so that stuff doesn't bother me so much. But other people are going to have a very different position on that. I do not want to break my hip. I've seen what happens to my friends when they've broken their hip and it's been a slide. Or I don't handle pain well. I don't want any injury. And some people are really fearful of that for good reason. So it's all individual. I mean, it really is very, very individual on what the prescriptive solution is. And if you had one solution for everyone, this would be easy, right? We wouldn't need to be sitting here talking about it. But it's about coming up with those decisions, and it's the criteria you're using for those decisions.
I have a question. What if is it on? Oh, thanks. What if the person has a do not resuscitate, and they have dementia, and they have a stroke, and you are the power of attorney for health, and they're at the hospital choking, and they're looking at you saying, "I don't want to die." So what would you do?
Well, now you're getting into a legal question. I gotta say, I'm not a lawyer, so I preface that. But as I understand, I mean, you can set up any powers that you want, any orders that you want, advance directives that you want. You can withdraw those advance directives at any time. So if I were the person who was attending that individual and they said to me, "I don't want to die," I would interpret that as a withdrawal of that do not resuscitate order, and I would treat them, because there would be potential liability for me if I didn't do that.
And then when they go back to, when they recover, you have to put the do not resuscitate back in.
And they would have to agree to that and be competent to do that again. So it may be permanently revoked at that time. They might not have the ability to do it again. And that's why when every time I do presentations, at least once a year, someone says something to me about how either they would like to be tattooed or they would like someone else to be tattooed. I said, we don't do that. You know, there are connotations going back to World War II, number one, for why we don't tattoo people. But the other thing is it's irreversible. Once you've tattooed someone, you can't make that change. So, anything else? Thank you. All right, thanks.